You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Locked On Hawks Postcast, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra. Batiste. Alongside me is NBA and college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. The Locked On Hawks Postcast is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it was a run and done situation for the Hawks tonight. We'll discuss. And 3 is showing up on 10. We'll download on that. But first, let's talk takes on the Hawks, unfortunately running out of gas on a back-to-back and dropping tonight's contest 127-121 to the Milwaukee Bucks. And Tate, you said the other bench showed up big this time.
They did. And when you look at somebody like a Kevin Porter Jr., who's kind of bounced around this league just kind of for different reasons, his 15 that he pours in and, you know, what I thought was really key for this team and what they needed to do was to kind of minimize the production that a Gary Trent can bring out there, because he reminds me so much of the Malik Beasley from Detroit that can really be a thorn in your side, especially when you're talking about shooting jump shots from the outside. On tonight, Gary Trent coming in, shooting 42% from 3. And then ends up, you know, with 15 points on tonight. And while he only shot 33% from 3, he was big from other areas of the floor tonight where he shot 60% overall from the field. So just from that standpoint alone, I think that, you know, it's showing that it can propose threats where it wasn't maybe necessarily the Dame Lillard from 3. Sometimes, you know, Brook Lopez sometimes is sometimes considered a bigger threat from the perimeter than guys like Trent, and even AJ Green, who's one of their more prolific 3-point shooters as well. While he didn't necessarily have a great game, only 8 points on tonight and didn't shoot it well from 3. I thought that they just really need to be dialed in on guys like that, but it was kind of threw the Hawks off a little bit because Kevin Porter was a guy that they probably didn't anticipate, even though he's a decent scorer, a pretty good defender as well. He hasn't really been putting up, you know, any kind of crazy contribution for the team like that as of late. So that could have potentially been something that was missed from an assignment standpoint, but give them credit. I mean, they totaled for like 40 points. We don't typically see a lot, even though the Hawks outscored the bench as they should and typically always do against their opponents. The Hawks typically don't allow 40 points out of the opposing team either. I think that's a big piece. Sure, we could talk about Dane and his 20-something or you know, talk about Giannis and his ability to be able to get his. But I think that they really needed to kind of put a chokehold on the bench on tonight. And that's something I also don't think the Hawks saw coming, to be honest.
Yeah, and the Hawks, their bench did show up. They did get 49 points. But again, like you said, when you look at the box score and you begin to look at all the points that were scored and who scored the points, when you think about the Hawks, it's 16 from Dyson Daniels and 28 from Trae Young as far as the starters go. But then you look on the other side and you look at Kyle Kuzma, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Brook Lopez, and Dame Lillard, 17, 26, 13, and 23, respectively. The Hawks didn't have anything in their starting lineup to be able to offset what the Bucks starting lineup did. So that 9 points, that was a differential between the Hawks bench and the Bucks bench. Well, the Bucks more than made up for it with their starters, but then for their bench, to your point, to be so close in points proximity to what the Hawks bench was able to do, you kind of couldn't afford for that to happen in such a close game. You couldn't afford for both the starters and the bench for the opposing team to kind of come through. But again, we look at last night and making no excuses, but just saying we understand. Last night took all the gas. I mean, it took everything for them to be able to beat the Memphis Grizzlies. So you had to think there was a possibility, whether it was the bench, the starting lineup, or both, that you wouldn't get as much out of them as you got out of them last night, which the bench was amazing.
That's fair.
But you come back home and it's like, you know, you're exhausted. And it's funny because I was thinking about this, and I know we're talking Bucks, and we'll move on and back to Bucks. But I was thinking about the fact that, yeah, you can talk about Jaren Jackson Jr. not being there, and you can talk about Ja Morant not being there, but Ja Morant wasn't there in the first game.
Right.
The Hawks played the Grizzlies either. So, and the Grizzlies did just fine. I think they won that game. So you talk about the fact that the Hawks still had to give 120%.
Yes, they did.
To beat the Grizzlies last night, even without Ja Morant. And then you have to come home and
just the running up and down alone.
Exactly.
Forget about plus the travel on top of that. Plus,
just pace. Yes, you talk about pace on
team in the
pace,
East
good on
that's in the
good when
top
it comes
4.
to pace. Yeah, and then you come back to this team today, and normally this would have been a win because let's face it, the Hawks have been a Bucks matchup nightmare since the Eastern Conference Finals. And you know, nobody hates talking about the Eastern Conference Finals more than me because I'm like, my God, that was ancient. But give the Hawks credit, no matter what lineup they put out there, the lineup seems to always be prepared for the Bucks. So for me, I don't care what the line said as far as like the betting line or whatever. I felt like the Hawks had every opportunity and probably were going to win this game, but that if they didn't, it might have been because, you know, their legs were just a little heavy later in that game. And that's when the Bucks were able to kind of take over. But there's one guy who it doesn't seem to matter who the Hawks play. It doesn't matter whether they're on a back-to-back. Nothing matters because the dude just shows up the same way game after game. And so I say he's basically competing with himself. And DeShaun, in a sneaky way, so I got to hear your comments after this, in a sneaky way, you believe the same, but we believe it for different reasons. You believe it because you think he's earning a trophy, or he should earn a trophy at the end of the year because he's in a class of one. I'm saying he's basically competing with himself because he got his second steal of the game tonight, and that was his 300th career theft. And the NBA, he's the steals leader, he's the deflections leader, and he's recorded at least 2 steals in 9 straight games. And guess who he tied? Himself. And guess when he did it? This season. So for me, that was the exciting part. Yeah, I really wanted the Hawks to win tonight, but yeah, I'm really excited that we get the same thing out of Dyson Daniels, because one of the themes of your and my conversation last year was inconsistency. We were always looking for somebody to be consistent, and we rarely found that guy. I believe that Dyson Daniels is that guy, and it's so important, regardless of position. It's so important that you get that consistency when you don't have a Jalen Johnson, who would have been your next level of consistency, productivity, impact to the game beyond Trae Young. So for me, I just love the fact that we got it out of him yet again. And he was in the game making impact time after time, 16 points. And then the thing about it is, you know, I love a good stat line that is going both ways. 16 points, 9 rebounds, 6 dimes, and a couple steals. That's the kind of stat line I'm talking about for Dyson Daniels.
You know, the crazy thing is, I think I mentioned some of this on last night after the Memphis game, is that you know that somebody's been like ridiculously like persistent or just consistent with stellar play in whatever particular department it is, when you do such things like he's doing, and it just feels like, oh, just another night, you know, just another night with 3 steals, you know, no big deal. And it seems like it's really not that big of a deal. I think one game he had like 7 steals, and it was kind of like eye-popping, in which it should be. But on nights like this where someone has 3 steals, and it's like that's pretty much like an average now at this point. It's kind of like, you know, another night, you know, another day at the office kind of thing. And so I think that is where you kind of have to give him a little bit of that, you know, put a little extra emphasis on it, because it feels like it's just such a regular thing that is happening. And, you know, I've been talking about, you know, defensive player of the year for quite some time. I know that we got some other guys that are probably in consideration for that. And obviously some of that, I think, because of the records mattering, which I still don't understand why it should. But I'm 30 years in of not understanding why records matter when it comes to individual accolades. Regardless of that fact, I mean, you just kind of got to give this dude a lot of credit, because he's, again, carrying on the load. And I'll keep on mentioning this because everybody's going to talk about what he does on the defensive end, but tends to forget the things that he brings on the offensive end. And from a leadership standpoint, although he's not vocal. And I compare that sometimes with and I do understand where it's, a little bit different just because of, I don't know if it's the aura, just whatever the two carry differently. Trae Young, I think, is a leader in his own way, but not vocally the way that people like it to be.
Yeah.
And Dyson Daniels is a leader in his own way, not vocally, but in a way that people do like it to be. You know what I mean? So it just kind of, it's weird the way that kind of works out, however it does. But I think it is good that, you do have to also mention that as one of the primary ball handlers when Trae is out of the game, that is Dyson Daniels, to shut down people on the other end of the ball where, sometimes they're guys that are taller than he is, stronger than he is, amongst other things. And he's still able to get, into that sternum area to be able to kind of like alter shots and setting themselves up for, different things. He just deserves that much more credit. If he's not an MVP for this season for the Hawks so far, if not nothing else, I'd be really surprised.
Yeah. Well, as always, Dyson Daniels finishes strong, but nope, they didn't finish this time like they did last night as a unit. They did not finish, and that's the turning point when we return. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by DoorDash. So NBA fans, get ready. Swoosh. When they do, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass. Every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. Here are a few ways you can take advantage of this deal. Lunch on the go. You need a quick and easy lunch the next day with Dash Pass. You get your favorite meals with 0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer and fueling your watch party. Planning to catch the next Hawks game, which is Friday night against the Indiana Pacers? Order your go-to snacks and meals at a discount and get ready for more high-scoring action. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save when any player scores 50 or more. Dash Pass members get 50% off and order the next day up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. You must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms do apply, but visit DoorDash to learn more.
This is what you'll be talking about. Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
So the Hawks took a 3-point lead into the fourth quarter, but they didn't take their offense with them. The Hawks got outscored by the Bucks 35-26 in that final period, but particularly it was a 22-9 fourth quarter run by the Bucks that was the turning point to this game, DeShaun. And how for you did the Bucks get there?
Well, I think honestly it was just a matter of being able to get stops. I mean, granted, the Atlanta Hawks, I think, did some things to help Milwaukee out a little bit with their inability to be able to hit some shots. And I still think that this is by no means an excuse, but I think with the rotations, they did their best to kind of keep it as regular as they possibly could. Not having Quinn Snyder tonight, I think, hurt a little bit more than some people actually will consider or think that it would a little bit.
Certainly, yeah.
But I thought that was a key stretch, to be honest, in which it did, because when you start factoring in when that happened in the game, in which games against certain teams that play certain styles, that put together certain schemes, when you start looking at the quarters that the Hawks sometimes don't always tend to play well, or the stretches between those quarters, I think that that's just kind of another reason. It's not really much of a surprise. I think that long of a run, I think some more timeouts probably could have been taken at that particular time, or I guess because it's not that the timeouts weren't taken. Timeouts were taken. But I don't love the idea of sometimes of when, though, like at what point during that run that the timeouts were taken. Let me put it that way and slow it down a little bit, moving a little bit too far ahead for myself. But I think that was one of the bigger things. And granted, give Milwaukee credit. they took advantage of a time where I think that there was some vulnerability within Atlanta, where Atlanta was a little bit confused on a couple of different things, besides the fact that some shots just were not falling, and
Yeah.
some of those shots had absolutely nothing to do with Milwaukee. There was still
True.
good shot selection. They just weren't falling.
Yeah, and you're right. Part of it is that the Bucks got there because the Bucks did what the Bucks were supposed to do. So in the fourth quarter, they still got enough out of 3 of their 5 starters to be able to close this game out. And we already talked about how good the bench was for them. And the fourth quarter might have been more what the Hawks didn't do, to your point, versus what the Bucks did do. So how did the Bucks get there? Courtesy of the Hawks more so than anything, but it was more courtesy of the Hawks offense that just kind of went stale. And again, I go back to Trey's legs probably got heavy, because there are some of those shots that those floaters, Trey makes that 9 out of 10 times. Exactly. And for him to miss a couple of them that were pretty much gimmies, and then other things you got to be smart about defensively. Like, you kind of can't go after the guy with like a little bit of time left in the clock and expect good things to happen. You go after the ball, unless you're Dyson Daniels, by the way. But if you're not going after the ball with the right approach, then you're basically just going to blow by the shooter.
That's right.
Shooter gets a 3, and then you see the momentum start to shift. So you think about little things like that, where at the end of the day, that could have potentially been a shot clock violation that would have then sent the game back to, or sent the possession back to the Hawks. And then you're just down by 3. All of a sudden, now you're down by 6. And you start feeling like it's kind of getting away from the Hawks because of little things that they did. But yeah, I think ultimately it was just the Hawks kind of killing themselves, for lack of a better term, offensively, other than Caris LeVert, whom we'll talk about in a few minutes, and Dyson Daniels, whom we've already talked about. Everybody else, their offense just kind of went away in the second half, and so went the game for the Hawks. But not all was lost today, because 12.8 points, 4.2 rebounds, and 44% 3-point field goal percentage, that gets you top honors for February, and that's what you'll be talking about.
This is what you'll be talking about.
So Zachary Risachet has been absolutely going off, right? He's been, and for us, it was more the consistency than anything, but great to see him named the Eastern Conference Rookie of the Month for February. Like I said, nearly 13 points a game, 4 boards, shooting the lights out from 3, and really, really making his presence felt at both ends of the court. We talked about him and the level of maturity that he's shown in his decision-making, how he approaches the game overall. So yeah, Zachary Risachet, I don't want to get into, I heard a conversation earlier today about this with what Alex Sarr is doing in Washington and what Risachet is doing. Right, DeShaun, that's the, hey, you guys who are listening, you can't see his face, but he's rolling his eyes. And I'm right there with you, because I was like, I'm not here for that conversation. I'm not, because I'm not going to do that back and forth Sarr, Risachet that we had to do for 18 years. Seriously. Young versus
Luka.
Yeah, I'm not trying to have that conversation. What I am trying to do is have a conversation about Zachary Risachet showing that he was worth the number 1 pick that the Hawks made.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you know, looking at this draft class, and to be honest with you, I was having a conversation with somebody, and we were having the same conversation, and I'm like, who is the front runner to be the Rookie of the Year this year? Like, I'm really having to, you know, kind of think about this. And while I think it's probably Castle from the San Antonio Spurs, I guess, if I had to mention somebody, but you know, I think we do have to give some credit to Zachary Risachet, where I think this is the first time of the entire season where you're able to see him put together some stretches of some consistent play, without beyond it being just about flashes. Like sometimes I'll be like, okay, I tend to like a little bit of this. I tend to like a little bit of that. I don't like this over here though. I don't like, I'm able to see him look like he's finding himself. He's playing with, you know, with a little bit more confidence. Kind of looks like he's getting stronger. If he's not, he's certainly, you know, playing with the mentality a little bit more as if, there's some things that are working out for him, knowing kind of getting his footing in the league a little bit. We heard some comments where I know some people kind of felt uneasy about some of the things he said about, how much more athletic it is over here versus where it was when he was playing over there, over the waters and so forth. I didn't necessarily find anything wrong with that personally. I thought it was just being honest, and he could have left that honesty at home. Maybe, I don't know, but he was just being honest, and I'm okay with an honest player. But I say all that to say there's not a lot of people that are able to say that they're averaging 13 points per game in the month of February, which was second amongst Eastern Conference rookies, and, scored 10 or more points in 10 out of 12 games in February as well. I mean, we could easily be having a conversation about him not doing that, as much uncertainty as there was about him coming into the draft. And I think it's good that, we always still like to remember the fact that Jalen Johnson had been out. Somebody needed to step up for this team. Between Jalen Johnson going out and DeAndre Hunter getting moved, a guy who had only played at most about a half a season, for this team, and still trying to learn the game, learn the language, everything in general. I think that he's done a pretty good job for himself. He's been good for this team, and I've got to eat it. Honestly, I got to eat some of my words of things that I said about him coming into the year, and I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah, this is one of those places where, in times where you want to be wrong, where it's perfectly okay to be wrong. We accept that. Yeah, we definitely don't mind. And you're right. As far as FanDuel, one of our sponsors here at Locked On, their odds do have Stephon Castle leading the way, and Jalen Wells, Memphis Grizzlies. Zachary Risachet is third, and then Zach Edey and Kel'el Ware round out the top five as far as the betting odds for Rookie of the Year. So I still think that puts Zachary Risachet in some good company. Like you said, Stephon Castle is he's kind of the runaway at this point. And I'm sure what he did for All-Star Weekend did not hurt his candidacy. But ultimately, there is still an outside chance for Jalen Wells, Zachary Risachet. Listen, you still have 19 games left, and you never know what the 19 games will look like for Zachary Risachet, and we might be having another conversation then about him. But someone that Tate wants to have a conversation about is Caris LeVert, because he said LeVert can convert. We'll discuss. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by Open Phone. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night. As your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where Open Phone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. For just $15 a month, which pretty much amounts to a couple of cups of coffee, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, Open Phone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba for 20% off 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge.
This is the Locked On Player of the Game.
So Tate, last night he won the game for the Hawks, and it was a big part of the Hawks almost beating the Bucks tonight. And that's what makes Caris LeVert our player of the game. He had another one of those great games off the bench, 29 minutes, 21 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal. And more importantly, when you look at the bench, or when you looked at the bench, when we got the news that Deandre Hunter was moving on, the thought was, who's going to replace that productivity, because he had really shown himself to be a good cog in the wheel for the bench and someone who you could count on to put in the starting lineup from time to time and produce. So when we got the news that it was going to be, hey, welcome Caris LeVert, Terrence Mann, Georges Niang, the thought is, okay, what are each of these three going to bring to the table? And I would venture to say most of our conversation, especially of late, has been about Caris LeVert and how good he's been in kind of filling in those gaps that the Hawks had with the loss of a Deandre Hunter, and on some level, even with the loss of a Bogdan Bogdanovic.
Absolutely. And I mean, listen, there's not going to be many times that I'm going to have a whole lot of positive things to say about a Wolverine, Tenitra. I'm just going to be honest with you. None of this probably
Mark
surprises
this on your calendar.
Yeah, for
DeShaun
sure.
Tate
For sure.
What is it called? DeShaun Tate went maize and blue.
Well, we didn't need a public service announcement either about it, Tenitra. But as long as maize and blue, you mix them together, still equal green, I'm good with it. However, there's a big game this weekend. We don't want to get into that. Big game for them, not Sparty. But Caris has been that guy that I've been saying, you know what, I feel like when they went into making some moves at the deadline, trades and so forth, I'm looking at Georges Niang to maybe be somewhat of a replacement. I'm not saying he can, duplicate or replicate. Certainly going to try to emulate, right, some of the things that that Bogey, was able to do here. But I really felt like that there's some. I felt like that it could be realistic that as long as Caris LeVert could be healthy, that he could do some things that we've seen, take a while for DeAndre Hunter to kind of do and to get to. This is an everyday regular thing. This isn't nobody having to move Caris to the bench because of this reason, for comfortability reasons, or him not just being a natural scorer. I think that, from a defensive standpoint, he could be better, but I think you could probably say that about just about everybody in this league sometimes. So definitely not a bad defender by any means, but I think sometimes he will get overshadowed by his ability of what he's able to do on the offensive end in comparison to the defensive end. Similar, like when we talk about Dyson Daniels, the way he is about defensively, sometimes his offense, how good he is on that side of the ball, gets overshadowed too. Now, I know that I made some comparisons in terms of the offensive firepower when I was talking about Lou Will and talking about Jamal and things like that, but I really felt that way, when I mentioned that on last night, and because he just really does bring that high octane, just right off the bench, instant scoring. And to be honest with you, it doesn't really think twice about it. It just seems like it comes natural. That's no dig or anything on DeAndre Hunter, but I feel like they got, and for what they were able to get out of Caris LeVert, I feel like that they got exactly what they got out of what they were looking to get out of DeAndre Hunter much faster. Like I'm sitting here and I'm looking at, where Caris LeVert, I think it was somewhere in the second quarter. At that point, he had converted on his very first score in the second quarter. That put him at 23 conversions out of 39 attempts or something like that. The dude is just an absolute bucket. And I think that I think he's really going to be good for this team. The main thing for him, and that has always been for his career, is about staying off the IR list.
Yeah, indeed. So 19 more games, at least in this regular season. If the Hawks can keep him and he can keep himself healthy, that can be definitely a positive for them as they head into the postseason. And the Hawks got some more good news today. We found out that Vit Krejci was officially assigned to College Park, and tomorrow, of course, marks that 3-week window since the Hawks announced his injury. And you look at the fact that it's 19 games left in the regular season. And if you could get one more cog back, that would be fantastic for this team, because you still don't know when Larry Nance is coming back. And if you could at least get one of the guys who went down, Vit Krejci, I'm like you. I was pretty tough on him at the beginning of the season, and rightfully so, because I know what I saw in College Park, and I'm like, that's that same stuff sometimes that I would see Vit do. But give him credit. As the season wore on, Vit Krejci got better and better at making decisions about when he's supposed to shoot the ball and defend. So I think that is a good thing for the Hawks that Vit Krejci is on his way back.
No, it is. I think that it's really good. I remember the days when I'll be having conversations with Kalen Johnson, and I always talk about number 99. And that was his name for me, because that's kind of what he meant to me at that particular time, until I was able to see him go out there and do something a little bit more. But again, like I always tell you, and I'll tell anybody, I'm always the first to raise my hand and be open to telling people about not necessarily how wrong I was at that time, but just his growth and his development, what I've been able to see. I feel like, just all of that we've been able to see from him has been clear and right in front of your face. And there are some times when I see him with, his ball handling abilities, or just some passes, or just some little things that I'm like, I kind of missed that play. Who was that? And it was like, that was Veet. And I'm like, for real? Kind of thing. That's all. But it's showing how much more comfortable, I guess, he's getting. A lot of times, he's able to shoot the ball, really well. I like his fearlessness probably more than anything.
That part.
Because that's where I think that, his comfortability within the game comes from. Some guys, I don't love them bringing their personality to the floor, because similarly, and forgive me for getting a little bit long-winded, but one of the issues that I thought that we kind of had with Cam Reddish wasn't about the things that we knew, the tools, the measurements, the wingspan, the potential, and all these things. Sometimes I felt like he just brought his personality to the floor too much, and that it was so equal to his game. V is something, that is a little slightly different from that.
Yeah.
And he's just a fearless player. And I think with that, it's just easier to get settled into your own rhythm and find yourself more time on the floor. Good job by V.
I like that you pointed that out, because having the opportunity to interview him while he was with the Skyhawks, he's a great personality. He is fierce, he's funny, and he definitely goes after the game with ferocity. So yeah, I gotta say, I love that you pointed that out about him, because I do believe that's the kind of player that Quinn Snyder likes. That's the kind of player he's going to give a chance. Hey, he wants you to take the good shots. He wants you to make the good decisions, but he also wants to see that passion. He wants to see the drive, and he wants to see the fear. Yeah, and that's what B. Krejci brings to the table, in addition to, like we said, getting better with the product that he was putting on the floor just before he got injured. So Locked On Sports Atlanta is the #1 place to hang out after every game. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We'll see you next time.